Behind Hollywood's golden glamour were shocking secrets. Stars who changed their names, erased their pasts, and reinvented themselves to survive. These are the hidden truths behind the legends. Merle Oberon. Merle Oberon possessed the beauty, talent, and magnetic screen presence that Hollywood coveted in the 1930s. However, there was one thing she lacked: the right ancestry, at least according to the industry's rigid and racist standards. Born Estelle Merle O'Brien Thompson in Bombay, British India in 1911, Oberon was of mixed Anglo-Indian descent. Yet, to the world, she was presented as a glamorous British aristocrat hailing from Tasmania. This deception wasn't merely a career move. It was a necessity for survival in an era where leading ladies were expected to be exclusively white. Hollywood executives understood the stakes. They advised Oberon to erase her Indian heritage entirely to maintain the illusion. She fabricated an upper-class Tasmanian upbringing, claiming she had been born in Hobart before relocating to England. In a 1934 interview, she reinforced this lie, even dismissing distant Australian relatives as mistaken. The truth, however, was far from aristocratic. Oberon grew up in poverty in Kolkata, raised by her mother, Constance Selby, who was of Tamil and Maori descent. When Oberon left for England at 17, Constance accompanied her, but not as her mother. To uphold the ruse, Constance posed as Oberon's maid, and in public, Oberon spoke to her only in Hindi to avoid suspicion. On screen, Oberon's transformation was equally meticulous. Cinematographers used strategic lighting and heavy makeup to make her appear more European. She even avoided direct sunlight to preserve a paler complexion. The efforts paid off. By the mid-1930s, she was starring opposite Hollywood's biggest names, earning an Oscar nomination for The Dark Angel, 1935, and later playing Kathy in Wuthering Heights, 1939. Yet, maintaining the lie took its toll. In 1965, when journalists began questioning her Tasmanian origins, Oberon abruptly canceled a planned visit to the island. Some reports suggest she was so unsettled by the scrutiny that she avoided Australia altogether for years. Even then, she never fully acknowledged the truth. It wasn't until after her death in 1979 that researchers uncovered her birth records in British archives, confirming her Indian heritage. The revelation stunned fans and historians alike. How had one of Hollywood's brightest stars concealed such a fundamental part of her identity? Oberon's story remains a stark reminder of the racial barriers in early Hollywood. She wasn't the only star who altered her past to fit the mold, but her case was among the most extreme. Today, as Hollywood reckons with its past and embraces more diverse talent, her legacy endures as a complex symbol, both of the industry's deep-seated racism and the extraordinary lengths some had to go to succeed. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford never existed in Hollywood. At least, not until MGM introduced her to the world in the mid-1920s. By then, she had already shed her birth name, Lucille Fay Lesueur, a moniker she reportedly despised, comparing it to a crustacean. But a new name was just the beginning. Crawford didn't merely tweak her past, she buried it. She spun tales of a privileged upbringing, claiming she attended elite schools and came from wealth. In reality, she was born in 1904 in San Antonio, Texas, and grew up in hardship. Her stepfather, Henry Cassin, managed a theater, sparking her love for performance, but accounts suggest her childhood was far from glamorous. Rumors swirled about mistreatment at home, though Crawford never confirmed them. After her mother's divorce, she worked as a laundress and waitress to survive. Hollywood, however, had no room for struggle in its fairy tales. Crawford allegedly falsified high school records to gain entry to Stevens College, though she never graduated. Instead, she set her sights on reinventing herself into a screen goddess. Off-screen, she cultivated an air of sophistication, always poised, always in control. But cracks in the illusion appeared over time. 4 tumultuous marriages, a notorious feud with Bette Davis, and later, her daughter Christina's explosive memoir, Mommy Dearest, which painted Crawford as anything but the glamorous icon she had fought to become. Despite the contradictions, Crawford remained one of Hollywood's most enduring stars. In an era where image was everything, she proved that sometimes, the truth was just another role to rewrite. Clark Gable. Clark Gable wasn't born into Hollywood royalty. He built his throne from the ground up, but if you asked him, you might have heard a different story. The so-called King of Hollywood carefully crafted an image of effortless sophistication, Yet the truth was far grittier. Born in 1901 in Cadiz, Ohio, Gable was the son of an oil driller. He lost his mother when he was just a month old, and his father expected him to follow the same blue-collar path. For a time he did, working in factories, oil fields, and even selling ties to scrape by. But Gable had bigger ambitions, and he knew that to succeed in Hollywood, he couldn't sound like a roughneck from the Midwest. Enter Josephine Dillon, a theater coach and later his first wife who transformed him. She paid for his dental work, coached his posture, and most crucially, refined his speech through rigorous elocution lessons. Gable shed his working-class twang for the deep, commanding voice that would define his on-screen persona. By the time he landed his breakthrough role in The Painted Desert, 1931, the transformation was complete. MGM didn't just cast him, they sculpted him. The studio dressed him in tailored suits, ensured his rugged masculinity never veered into crudeness, and erased any trace of his working-class origins in press materials. His past as a factory worker was buried. His struggles to break into Hollywood were downplayed. The studios wanted a star, not a laborer who had clawed his way to fame, and Gable played the part perfectly. Yet behind the scenes, he never fully let go of his roots. Despite his larger-than-life status, he preferred quiet nights on his ranch over Hollywood parties, chatted with locals in rural Ohio, and reminisced about his early days. Even as the face of Hollywood glamour, the steelworker's son never disappeared. He just learned to hide in plain sight. Rock Hudson. In 1947, a towering truck driver from Illinois arrived in Hollywood with big dreams and a name casting agents couldn't pronounce. Roy Harold Scherer Jr. didn't scream matinee idol, so his agent, Henry Wilson, crafted a new identity, Rock Hudson. The name was pure marketing genius, evoking strength and grandeur. But the makeover didn't stop there. Studios spun a backstory that painted Hudson as a rugged Midwesterner with a Navy background, a man who had grown up fixing cars and chopping wood. In reality, he had been a shy, awkward kid who struggled in school and worked blue-collar jobs before catching his break. Then came Hollywood's biggest cover-up. Hudson's personal life didn't fit the industry's unwritten rules for leading men. In 1955, just as Confidential magazine prepared to expose his secrets, Hudson suddenly married his agent's secretary, Phyllis Gates. The timing was suspicious, and while some biographers suggest the marriage was a strategic move to silence rumors, the full extent of studio involvement remains debated. Gates later insisted she had no idea about Hudson's true orientation, though whispers in Hollywood hinted otherwise. For decades, Hudson guarded his private life while Hollywood sold the fantasy of an all-American heartthrob. But in 1984, the illusion shattered. His AIDS diagnosis forced the industry and the public to confront the reality behind the facade. When he passed away the following year, he became an unwitting catalyst for change, pushing conversations about secrecy, identity, and acceptance into the spotlight. Cary Grant. Before Cary Grant became the epitome of Hollywood charm, he was Archibald Leach, a working-class boy from Bristol, England, with a thick accent and a past he preferred to leave behind. Born in 1904, Leach's early years were marked by hardship. His father placed his mother in a mental institution when he was around 9, sources conflict on the exact age, and told young Archie she had simply gone away. He wouldn't learn the truth until his late 20s. By then, he had already begun his transformation. At 14, he forged his father's signature to join an acrobatic troupe touring the US, never looking back. But when Hollywood came calling, Archibald Leach didn't fit the mold of a leading man, so he became someone who did, Cary Grant. He trained his voice to adopt a transatlantic accent, smoothing out his Bristolian inflections until his origins became ambiguous. Some reports suggest he even claimed to have been born in the US, a strategic move to sidestep the era's anti-British sentiment. But the reinvention didn't stop at his voice. Grant cultivated an aura of effortless sophistication, maintaining a perpetual suntan to avoid studio makeup and dressing with impeccable style. In reality, he had left school at 14 and grew up in modest circumstances. Yet the illusion worked. By the 1940s, he was one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. Still, behind the scenes, he wrestled with the weight of his own creation. "Everybody would like to be Cary Grant," he once said. So would I. It was a rare admission that the persona he crafted had become a role he could never quite step out of. Even as he aged out of leading man roles, he hesitated to let go of the image. In 1953, he considered retiring, fearing method actors like Marlon Brando would render his polished style obsolete. But he returned for Hitchcock's To Catch a Thief, 1955, proving he still had the charm audiences craved. In 2020, a blue plaque was unveiled at his childhood home in Bristol, a nod to the boy who lived there before he became Cary Grant. It was a reminder that behind the Hollywood legend was a man who spent his life playing a role, one he could never fully escape. Rita Hayworth Hollywood in the 1930s had a rigid formula for stardom. And for Margarita Carmen Cancino, that formula didn't include a Spanish surname or identity at all. Born in Brooklyn in 1918 to a Spanish flamenco dancer father and an Irish-English mother, young Rita was a natural performer. But when she arrived in Hollywood, her heritage became a liability. Columbia Pictures saw potential in her beauty, but believed she needed a more all-American look to land leading roles. The transformation wasn't immediate, it took years. First, her mother, Volga Hayworth, oversaw a painful electrolysis procedure to raise her daughter's hairline, burning away sections of hair follicles to give her a higher forehead, aligning with Anglo beauty standards. Then, the studio encouraged her to dye her naturally dark hair a striking red and adopt a new last name, Hayworth. By the late 1930s, Margarita Cancino had become Rita Hayworth, a carefully rebranded Hollywood starlet. But behind the glamorous pinup posters and the media's love goddess moniker, Hayworth struggled with the identity she had been forced to erase. "Men fell in love with Gilda," she famously said in 1946, referring to her most iconic role. "But they wake up with me." Though she embraced her career, some speculate she privately resented the sacrifices she made to fit Hollywood's mold. While she never explicitly denounced the changes, she later spoke about her Spanish heritage with pride, perhaps hinting at a longing for the identity she had been urged to conceal. Her story remains a striking example of the industry's obsession with conformity, a reminder of the price of fame in an era that demanded its stars fit a very specific image. Tony Curtis. In 1948, a 23-year-old Bernard Schwartz stepped off a bus in Hollywood with a dream and a name that casting directors deemed too ethnic for a leading man. So, he transformed into Tony Curtis, borrowing inspiration from the novel Anthony Adverse and tweaking his mother's surname, Kurtz, into something smoother. But the reinvention didn't stop there. Curtis took speech lessons to soften his thick Bronx accent, replacing his streetwise cadence with the polished drawl of a matinee idol. Universal International, the studio that signed him, encouraged him to downplay his Jewish heritage, pushing him toward a more marketable image. While he never outright claimed aristocratic European roots, he carefully avoided discussing his immigrant upbringing, letting the public imagine a more refined past. By the early 1950s, Curtis was a rising star, flashing his good looks in swashbuckling adventures and romantic dramas. But when Sweet Smell of Success, 1957, hit theaters, critics finally saw him as more than just a pretty face. Decades later, Curtis openly discussed the industry's pressure to conform. "I had to hide who I was," he admitted. By then, the Bronx Kid had already rewritten his own Hollywood story. Fred Astaire. Fred Astaire glided across the screen like he was born dancing, effortless, untouchable. But behind the illusion was a man who worked himself to the bone. Hollywood wanted a prodigy, not a perfectionist, so they helped craft the myth. Born Frederick Austerlitz in Omaha, Nebraska in the late 1800s, his name didn't exactly scream stardom. His family changed it to Astaire around 1910, likely for theatrical appeal, though whispers suggest it was also to sidestep anti-German sentiment brewing before World War I. The studios took it further, selling him as a natural talent who barely needed rehearsal. In reality, he trained relentlessly from childhood, performing in vaudeville with his sister Adele. By the time he reached Hollywood, he was a seasoned pro, but even that wasn't enough. His early screen test at RKO in the 1930s was brutal. Can't act, slightly bald, also dances. Nearly dismissed before his career began, Astaire doubled down. He insisted on full-body shots in his films, ensuring audiences saw every step as if it were pure instinct. Off-screen, he rarely spoke about the grueling rehearsals that left him exhausted. His financial struggles as a child were quietly smoothed over in favor of a cleaner, more glamorous narrative. The studios shaped his story, but Astaire made sure the illusion never cracked, and that's why his legend still floats across the dance floor. Greer Garson. Greer Garson had the grace of royalty, the diction of an aristocrat, and the kind of Hollywood mystique that made audiences believe she was born for the screen. But her polished image wasn't just talent, it was a carefully crafted illusion, right down to her supposed Irish roots. For years, MGM's publicity machine insisted Garson hailed from County Down, Ireland, weaving a tale of noble lineage that even linked her to the legendary Scottish outlaw Rob Roy McGregor. A 1942 New York Times article described her as an Irish-born descendant of Rob Roy, a claim that added to her aura of refinement. There was just one problem: it wasn't true. Garson was actually born in London on September 29, 1904. Her father was a commercial clerk. Her upbringing was solidly middle class, hardly the aristocratic origins Hollywood wanted to sell. So, the studio leaned into the myth, peppering her backstory with references to Celtic mythology. One dubious claim suggested that Eileen, a name tied to ancient Ireland, meant the most beautiful woman in the world. In reality, Éire was a sovereignty goddess, not a beauty title. Garson herself played along, wistfully recalling summers spent escaping back to Ireland in interviews. The implication? Deep Irish roots. The reality? Little evidence she spent much time there at all, but the deception worked. Audiences embraced her as the dignified British heroine, and her Oscar-winning role in Mrs. Miniver, 1942, cemented her status. Even as whispers of her true birthplace surfaced later, she never corrected the record. Her birth certificate, confirming her London origins, only became widely known after her death in 1996. Was this MGM's doing, or did Garson knowingly shape her own myth? Either way, by the time the truth came out, it didn't matter. She had already secured her legacy as one of the Golden Age's most distinguished stars. Sophia Loren. Sophia Loren's Hollywood story was carefully polished, but not entirely honest. Studios painted her as a born goddess of European sophistication, effortlessly elegant from day one. The truth? She clawed her way out of brutal poverty. Born Sofia Villani Ciccolone in war-torn Naples, she grew up in a world of hunger and hardship. "I was a very thin child," she later admitted. Malnutrition left her frail, but that detail never made it into Hollywood's glamorous narrative. Her father refused to marry her mother, leaving the family in financial turmoil. Sophia, her mother, and her sister endured World War II in makeshift shelters, sometimes hiding in train tunnels to escape bombings. She later confessed the experience left her with a lifelong fear of the dark. But when she arrived in Hollywood, none of this was part of the official story. Instead, studios focused on her natural beauty and exotic allure. Even her name wasn't her own. As a struggling teen model, she competed in beauty pageants not for fame, but survival. One contest prize included a train ticket to Rome, which she used to escape Naples. Once she caught the eye of producer Carlo Ponti, he suggested a makeover. Sophia Loren was born, inspired by Swedish actress Marta Torén. She took elocution lessons to soften her thick Neapolitan accent, crafting the refined persona Hollywood expected. Despite the reinvention, she never truly left her roots behind. She often spoke about her mother's sacrifices and remained deeply connected to Naples, funding hospitals and charities in Italy. In her memoir, she reflected, "I'm just a little girl from Napoli." Hollywood may have rewritten her past, but she never let herself forget the truth. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn spun a tale fit for the silver screen, an aristocratic adventurer who wrestled crocodiles, struck gold in Papua New Guinea, and lived on the edge. But the truth was far less cinematic. Born in 1909 in Tasmania, Flynn wasn't the son of nobility, but of a respected biology professor. His mother's lineage was less documented, though not quite the mystery he suggested. Expelled from multiple schools, including Sydney's Shore School for theft, he had a reputation for mischief. Before Hollywood, Flynn painted himself as a soldier of fortune, a daring prospector and plantation overseer. He did spend time in Papua New Guinea, but but records suggest his work was more routine. Clerical duties, minor law enforcement, and a stint in mining. As for the infamous crocodile duel, he later admitted it was a staged stunt to impress Hollywood insiders. Warner Brothers didn't just seize on his wild persona, they built it into legend. Cast in Captain Blood, 1935, and The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938, Flynn became Hollywood's ultimate swashbuckler. Off-screen, his reckless lifestyle only fueled the myth. But by the 1950s, cracks in his carefully crafted image began to show. His posthumous autobiography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, 1959, laid bare the embellishments. He confessed to a lifelong rebellion against authority, admitting fame and fortune didn't bring fulfillment. By then, it didn't matter. The world had already bought the legend. Flynn proved that in Hollywood, the right story isn't just powerful, it's everything. Tab Hunter. Tab Hunter was the ultimate Hollywood heartthrob. Blonde, blue-eyed, and every studio executive's dream. But his all-American image was completely manufactured. Born Arthur Andrew Kelm in 1931, he was a quiet, artistic kid who loved figure skating more than football. That didn't fit the rugged leading man mold, so his agent, Henry Wilson, the same man who sculpted Rock Hudson's career, gave him a new name and persona, Tab Hunter, the idealized picture of 1950s masculinity. The reinvention didn't stop there. Warner Brothers carefully orchestrated his public life, pairing him with starlets like Natalie Wood and Debbie Reynolds for high-profile romances that existed only in gossip magazines. Behind the scenes, Hunter lived in fear. In an era where being outed could end a career overnight, he had to play the part both on and off screen. Then came Confidential magazine, a tabloid notorious for exposing Hollywood's secrets. They had dirt on Hunter, and rumors suggest Warner Brothers struck a deal to keep it buried. Whether true or not, the damage was done. His career cooled, and by the late 1950s, he was being edged out by a new generation of stars. Decades later, Hunter took back his story. In 2005, he released his autobiography, Tab Hunter Confidential, finally speaking openly about his life and the industry's suffocating expectations. His story wasn't just about reinvention. It was about survival in a Hollywood that demanded its stars be anything but themselves. Lupe Velez. Lupe Velez didn't just break into Hollywood. She stormed in with a persona so fiery it burned itself into history. Born Maria Guadalupe Velez de Villalobos in 1909 in San Luis Potosí, Mexico, Velez came from a modest background, not the wealthy lineage some studio press releases hinted at. Her father, an army officer, disapproved of her performing ambitions, so she took her mother's surname and made her way to Mexico City. But Hollywood wasn't looking for Maria Guadalupe. They wanted Lupe, a wild, unpredictable Latina who fit their exotic fantasies. By the late 1920s, Velez had carved her place in Hollywood, starring alongside Douglas Fairbanks in The Gaucho, 1927. Unlike many silent-era stars, her thick accent didn't derail her career. Instead, it became part of her brand. Studios amplified her image, crafting the Mexican Spitfire persona, a hot-tempered, passionate woman who embodied every stereotype Hollywood could muster. Velez leaned into it, playing up the theatrics in interviews and delivering sharp, self-aware retorts when people confused her with the character. The reinvention worked, but it came at a cost. While her contemporary Dolores Del Rio was cast as the elegant, untouchable beauty, Velez was the wild, unpredictable one. The Mexican Spitfire film series in the 1940s cemented her fame, but trapped her in typecasting. No matter how much comedic or dramatic range she displayed, she was still the Spitfire. Velez resented the limitations, but never erased her heritage. She openly criticized Hollywood's treatment of Latinos, and once hosted a 1942 benefit for Mexican servicemen, addressing the crowd entirely in Spanish, an act of defiance in an industry that pressured actors to assimilate. But the persona she built followed her off-screen. The press fixated on her tumultuous personal life, her romances, her temper, her tragic end in 1944. Even in death, Hollywood mythology refused to let her go. Kenneth Anger's Hollywood Babylon spread the salacious and widely debunked story that she died in a humiliating accident, overshadowing her real legacy. Today, scholars are re-examining Velez beyond the Spitfire label. As film historian Diana Martinez suggests, Velez wasn't just a stereotype. She was a woman who fought to exist on her own terms, even when Hollywood tried to rewrite her story. Paul Muni. Paul Muni didn't just act, he vanished into his roles. But before he became Hollywood's master of transformation, he had to reinvent himself. Born Meskhila Meyer Weisenfreund in what's now Ukraine, Muni faced an industry that favored assimilation. So, he reshaped his identity, adopting the name Paul Muni, and letting studios present him as a Chicago-born, classically trained actor, despite his true roots in Yiddish theater. Back then, Jewish performers often downplayed their heritage to land leading roles, and Muni was no exception. His obsession with transformation extended beyond his personal story. He meticulously studied dialects, altered his physicality, and applied elaborate makeup to disappear into characters. Hollywood found his dedication frustrating. Studio executives grumbled that he was unrecognizable from one role to the next. But that commitment paid off. In 1936, he won an Oscar for The Story of Louis Pasteur, a role he personally fought for, proving he had the power to defy studio expectations. Despite his Hollywood reinvention, Muni never fully abandoned his theatrical roots. In 1955, he returned to the stage and won a Tony for Inherit the Wind, a nod to the world where he first honed his craft. His story is a testament to the sacrifices actors made to fit into Hollywood's golden age, and the lengths they went to in order to stand out. If you've enjoyed this exploration of Hollywood's hidden histories, please leave a like and comment. Consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to stay updated on our weekly videos. Thanks for watching.